Today is February 25th, 2014. We're going to take a look at Franz Brentano, the German/Swiss philosopher and psychologist who was situated more or less between David Hume's empiricism and Edmund Husserl's phenomenology. But Husserl more or less credits Brentano as being the true father of phenomenology, even though Brentano called it empirical psychology. But the term phenomenology really hadn't been born yet. And so what Brentano did in his book was present the very first true structuring for a phenomenology within a psychological framework. So it was a very significant work. It was actually published originally way back in 1874. It took almost 100 years. It didn't make it into English until 1973. So we're just barely getting acquainted with Franz Brentano in the United States, but he played a significant role in postmodern thought in France and was very influential for Husserl as well. So we have to look at him as really a fundamental philosopher for fulfilling that substrate of the postmodern movement that we've been investigating. And we need to give him his due because, myself included, because I have traditionally been giving Hegel the value of contributing the philosophical framework of subjective spirit to the postmodern movement, and then Heidegger supplying the existentialism. But the truth is, Brentano supplies the psychological framework, and Hegel adds to Brentano later. So really it's Brentano that should get the credit for supplying a true postmodern psychological framework. And so it's not difficult at all to approach him, because we're going to approach him with the framework we're already familiar with, but we're going to find that he adds little subpoints in this framework of the unconscious that makes it a little more definitive, and rather than make it a little more complicated, it clarifies a few questions that we might have had on how certain steps can be taken. And Brentano tells us, he even articulates the little intermediary areas of the unconscious and makes it a little bit smoother transition. So when we take up the unconscious, we're going to look at the first stage, and it's observation. And external objects are taken as phenomena. And for Brentano, psychology equals phenomenology. So that's his empirical psychology actually is phenomenology. The self's task is to acquire the truth of phenomena, the relation of phenomena to the ego, in other words, the subjective side, and then to define an ethics of phenomenology. And in order to do all of these, the self must acquire the trajectory of the phenomena that are defined in a situation, or their horizon. So we have a primary interest in intentionality, which is really big for Brentano. Intentionality is that which lifts a phenomena from an external perception to being an inner perception, is its inward aspect of intentionality. So that's a very important concept for Brentano. Now the triad that we're going to employ, according to Brentano, is number one, the sensation of the simple phenomena that are presented to the self, and then two, the imagination of acquiring the unconscious mental work of inner perception, and then we transition into the third step of the cognition, or the field of cognitive psychology. Now what's interesting is that Brentano actually gives the 4 axioms for this phenomenology that's going to be developed, and every postmodern accepts these axioms as a precondition, but it's nice that he articulates them for us back in 1874. And the 4 axioms for phenomenology are: number 1, material conditions are what determine consciousness. Number 2, the mind always thinks, leaving traces even in the unconscious mind of latent ideas that will later come to fruition. And 3, there is such a thing as unconscious thinking, as an inner perception of the unconscious that reworks the latent ideas that are discovered on the unconscious side. And then 4th and finally, all of this develops within the unconscious a static psychic state of the self that will influence all of the cognitive work that will later evolve. So you've got material conditions, mind always thinks, unconscious thinking, and static psychic state. Material conditions, mind always thinks, unconscious thinking of inner perception, and static psychic state. Those are the 4 axioms that undergird his entire system and really have more or less established the axiomatic substrate for all postmodern thought. Now when Brentano transitions into step 2, he already includes that aspect of the fringe that Husserl talked about. This is where Husserl got it. He does talk about that counterblow of the returning complex ideas from the system previously having run, which influences our first grasping of feeling percepts, the intuitive confrontation of sensation, and the developing of the feeling percepts includes this fringe counterblow of returning complex ideas. And Brentano says that it's a fashioning of an internal sense that is stored within the self based on the return from cognitive consciousness, a previous work. It becomes a gentle influence over phenomena as a fringe of influence, and it could be equated with the static body state. So that's what forms our static body state, is this returning notion of our complex ideas that return back into the realm of otherness and the unconscious. They keep feeding that static body state. Now this is applied to the sensation of observation through imagination. So imagination is in the second phase, second moment, imagination as an applied body state. Body state is applied as a filter to the sensory phenomena. Phenomena become feeling percepts. There is a 3-part methodology that is initiated at this stage. Now, 3-part methodology for Brentano is induction, of forming generalizations based on our repetitive material experience, and then 2, deduction of ideas from the generalizations that takes place in cognitive consciousness, and then 3, verification through the positing of a concrete ethics that will evolve after the cognitive work of consciousness. So induction through deduction to verification in positing. Now at this stage, at the second moment in the unconscious, we're dealing with what Brentano calls physical phenomena in the act of external perception. This is the stage of external perception. It has 5 aspects. It's really a non-perception because it's not, as it is thinking, but it's non-perceptive thinking. We simply acquire the simultaneous physical phenomena which appear simultaneously to the self. It is the physical phenomena that represent the sensate object of perception, and we acquire the phenomena as a multiplicity, not as any kind of unity. It's really just we acquire the sensate multiplicity of phenomena from our material experience. And from these encounters, the most we can do is form sensate generalizations as feeling percepts. So we do form generalizations, but not universal concepts, but a generalized feeling percept. That is a big difference. It hasn't reached any kind of conceptual level. We're forming generalized feeling percepts that are based on a presentation of simultaneous material sensate experiences that we interpret into feeling percepts or feeling percept phenomena, because we do develop phenomena, but they are going to be strictly physical phenomena at this stage. But we have to have physical phenomena before we can transition into mental phenomena, and the mental phenomena are necessary in order to transition into consciousness. So stage 3 gets split for Brentano into 3A and 3B. It has 2 moments, but it's going to be the moments that develop the mental phenomena. And so for 3A, we pass through the moment of recollection in order to check our logic of causality. So previous inner perception of thought pictures are recalled from memory in order to check the logic of causality for the construction of a new thought picture. These are our recalled observations from previous experiences. And here we apply structure to the feeling percepts that we have acquired in order to reach kind of a prototype form for structuring these feeling percepts, which is structuring strictly based on the idea of causality at this stage. But in 3B, we actually develop a substance of the soul, and the substance of inner perception becomes an actual internal positing of a thought picture of feeling percepts arranged in structural order. Feeling percepts arranged in structural order, based strictly on causality, and here's a big and intention at this point, but it will gain significance, more significance before being copied to the cognitive consciousness. But at this stage, it is a thought picture of causality and intention. Now, when I talk about intention, when he talks about intention, he's talking about how do they become mental phenomena. So, physical phenomena, this is 3B, physical phenomena become mental phenomena in the act of inner perception, and he gives us 6 aspects of inner perception. Number 1, it is an inner perception of intentional content. Intentional internal existence of an object is obtained, and this is the real existence of an object. And phenomena are presented to the self as an interrelated unity once we discover this layer of intentionality instead of multiplicity. And this is considered the true. The intentional content is immediately evident to the self, and it is a immediately evident unity of intentionality that is presented as the true. This becomes inscribed in the self. Phenomena are perceived by oneself, and that oneself will carry it to the Dokunta threshold. Remember, Aristotle's Dokunta threshold was that threshold of shared perceptions that we share with others in order to refine our thought picture model before we can move on to the higher level of cognitive processing. So he puts the Dokunta threshold at its proper place. Now later, the only person that really gets into this, remember, is Bouffray. Bouffray is the only person that takes up Brentano's Dokunta threshold, but it should have been taken up by everyone because it is essential. There is obviously going to be some dialogue even at this level, and he says we gather at the Dokunta threshold of gathering selves to exchange with others the feeling percept thought pictures. Now when we gather at the Dokunta threshold, at this point we're going to develop the categories of our thought picture and the subsystems, and we do this by taking our law of causality picture and evolving it to a deeper significance through partitioning and measure. Partitioning and measure. So before we copy to the cognitive consciousness, we pass through partitioning and measure. Now, in partitioning, we take the elementary phenomena, which in the future will be called categories. They're not categories yet because we're still in the range of feeling percepts. We take elementary phenomena and we partition them out as those more significant phenomena that actually abbreviate complex phenomena below them. And then in addition to this, we do the work of intensive magnitude. The intensive magnitude of phenomena are determined by recalling prior phenomena stored in memory and by taking up the stance of the existential level of attention. So there's that existential stance that we've talked about in the past. It's all important. Brentano mentioned that back in 1874. You've got to take up this existential level of attention in order to acquire the intensive magnitude of the phenomena, and in order to partition the more significant phenomena as that which abbreviates complex subsystem phenomena below them. So it's a very important stage because you've got to take that strictly cause and effect, that causality thought model, and the causality thought model has to become close to significance in order to transfer into the cognitive area, because we want to transition from feeling percepts to signs. So to reach that deeper significance, we pass through partitioning and measure at the Kunta threshold of sharing our views with other selves and engaging in a dialogue of feeling percepts. Remember, on the cognitive side, we have the composition threshold that discusses ideas, but here it's the discussion of feeling percepts. It's more of a level of sharing convictions with each other, sharing motivations with each other, sharing horizons with each other. Later, we'll enter into the cognitive composition threshold, but Brentano says we still have a threshold on this side. Now, the only person later to come along and pick that up was Bouffray. Bouffray did emphasize this Kunta threshold, but everyone else concentrated more or less on the composition threshold and made it fit both sides, which they should not have done. So just in summary, we're going to look at this and we're going to say that Brentano took us from moment 1, observation, through moment 2, which combined the counterblow of developing that static body state, which was used by imagination to apply to our physical phenomena in order to create the feeling percepts of phenomena. That initiated a process of a 3-part methodology of induction, deduction, and verification. And we acquired in the second moment the physical phenomena by realizing that we were dealing with non-perceptive type thinking of just grasping the physical phenomena on the sensate side of reality and taking them up as a multiplicity, which later would need organization. At that stage, at the second moment, they just reached generalization as individualized, generalized phenomena. But then we pass through a recollection of all of our past thought pictures. By looking at those, we refined our idea of the logic of causality and helped us to form a proto-first ordering of the feeling percepts as a logic of causality thought picture. But that had to be lifted to true mental phenomena instead of the physical phenomena. And so at this level, in the third moment, the self gets involved in acquiring that internal intentionality that is present in every element of a situation. And by acquiring the intentionality, we grasp the deeper mental phenomena. And the mental phenomena are the real, true phenomena, and they can be combined in a unity of intentionality. So now we have a thought picture of intentionality, but even that can't be copied to consciousness because the thought picture of intentionality needs to be partitioned and measured. And so then we transfer to the threshold of dialogue with others, which is the Kunta threshold on the unconscious side, and by engaging in a dialogue of motivations, and a dialogue of horizons, and a dialogue of feeling, mental phenomena, of generalizations, but still generalizations that are starting to lean toward signification because now we know something of their intentionality and the horizon, then we'd start to put together a more significant thought picture, and voila, we have a thought picture of intensive magnitudes of phenomena that are arranged in more of a hierarchy with subsystems, and that gets copied into the cognitive consciousness. So Franz Brentano, excellent, we did this one in about 20 minutes. Franz Brentano actually gives us the first proto-true phenomenology, and he gives it to us in a way that really informs Husserl. Husserl was very much in recognition of Brentano and stated that Brentano more or less defined his philosophy. But he gives us that very first psychological structure. So the others later came along and picked it up. Hegel contributed to it with his philosophy of subjective spirit and helped us develop even more detail into the psychology. But the original psychology will go to Brentano. And of course, when Husserl picked it up, well, who did he feed it to? He fed it to Heidegger, and he fed it to Hegel. So Husserl became the mediation for Brentano. But we have just a beautiful picture of how phenomenology really was born. And we did not pick it up in the United States until 1973. Unbelievable, but so Brentano emerged 97 years after David Hume. 97 years after David Hume, and he quoted David Hume a lot, so he relied on the empiricism of David Hume, but he anticipated Husserl. So, but you've got almost 100 years. You've almost got a 100-year span. Or you got 97-year span from David Hume to reach Franz Brentano. So then he really delved into Locke and David Hume and their empiricism, but applied it to psychology and came up with this empirical psychology. So that'll wrap up Franz Brentano from his original work on psychology from an empirical standpoint, originally published in